Meet SAE International. You might not know us, but we've been with you. For the past 100 years, we've been revolutionizing transportation and mobility, partnering and supporting the dreamers, innovators, and can-doers who are changing the world. It's the child whose future career as an engineer will be shaped by our STEM education programs. It's the businesswoman boarding her flight with peace of mind, knowing that our committees have created the standards that ensure she gets from Detroit to Delhi and back again safely. It's the parents-to-be who are sleeping soundly, knowing that their electric car is fully charged and ready when it's go time. Driven by a passion to advance mobility knowledge and solutions, SAE's global community of over 200,000 engineers, technical experts, and volunteers continues to develop and curate the most reliable and comprehensive collection of engineering resources and consensus-based standards on Earth. The next mobility revolution is upon us. Connected and automated, electrified and sustainable. SAE will be here, as we have for the last 100 years, moving the world forward.
Hey everybody, Mark Z here, Supercharged on the road today in Southfield, Michigan. That's the Lodge Freeway there in the back, you can probably hear it. This is the Civic Center here, those gold buildings that you've probably driven by multiple times. We're gonna go in there and meet Dave Andrea. Dave's a longtime collaborator for SAE Detroit section, and he's got some really interesting reports and research we're gonna talk about. So let's go inside and see Dave and see what he's got to say. Hey, we're here with Dave Andrea, and he's going to give us some introduction. Who's Plant and who's Moran and all the other interesting things we want to learn. Hey, Dave, good to see you again.
Good morning, Mark, and it's great to see you as well. Thanks for coming through. And Mr. Plant and Mr. Moran are our founding fathers, right? And in 1924, Valerian Plant founded us as an accounting firm, and he had that basics in terms of the mechanics of it. But then coming through in 1950, Mr. Moran came through and really put the culture piece on it, the organization piece around it. So you had the expertise of the accounting side with the culture that really still pervades everything we do here nearly 100 years after our founding.
Wow. So you guys like count beans here, or do you do other things?
Well, we do a lot of things here. So certainly it's still on our history side in terms of accounting and tax and assurance piece is the bulk of the business. But we have a very large management consulting side, which is a part that I'm on in automotive. But then as well, we're small enough to still have that client perspective, but we're large enough to have expertise in K through 12 on the public education side, looking at real estate, wealth management, and there's a whole host of expertise that comes under the umbrella of Plante Moran.
So one thing that we're going to talk about here in just a moment is your supplier automotive focus, because we're in Detroit, right? So automotive supplier and OEM relationship and how to measure that and the data behind that. And what's your background in that area, by the way?
Well, my background actually has always been at that interface between the vehicle manufacturers and the suppliers. I really have three segments of my career. I've started off on the academic side at the University of Michigan, and that was at the Transportation Research Institute. Then I had another chunk of my career at the Original Equipment Suppliers Association, which is the trade association representing suppliers. And that was both on commercial issues as well as in Washington, D.C. And now pure on the consulting side, measuring the working relationships between the vehicle manufacturers and the suppliers.
Well, today, hey, Dave, good information up here. Going to share with us the supplier relations momentum flywheel. But before we get to that, I really want to find out, were you in the Detroit Parade Company? Were you in the professional clown
well, I wouldn't put it
business?
Professional. I wouldn't call it that. But yes, that's something that surprises people because I'm usually quiet and a little bit more reserved. But I am one of the distinguished clown corps that marches in the Detroit Thanksgiving Day Parade. We have about 220, 250
Neat.
people it varies every year that do this. And, for it's more than 15 minutes along the parade route, but it's your moment of fame. Right? And you get in hundreds of selfies and all those types of things. So it's fun, and it's great to see the city of Detroit
Absolutely
all come together along Woodward Avenue.
Neat. Well, we're here in the Motor City area, right? So we're at your office here in the Southfield. And today, actually, we're going to wheel into the supplier relationships that report that you've generated. I'm really interested in understanding what that is. So if you could start us in turning in that wheel there.
Yeah, a little history here, Mark, is the survey itself was founded 23 years ago by Dr. John Hankey, who is a professor of marketing at Oakland University. Mm-hmm. And going way back, really Tom Stallkamp, who was at Chrysler, head of purchasing,
right,
and a few others, wanted to try to measure the working relationship between the suppliers and the vehicle manufacturers to see what was the rate of return on that relationship, because it's very complex, it's very fuzzy, but how do you measure it? And so Dr. Hankey came up with the Working Relations Index, which we have been doing 23 years.
Wow.
Plante Moran bought the practice from Dr. Hankey 4 years ago and moved it into the Plante Moran family.
So measurement, you said that a couple times, and as an engineer, it's like, I need metrics. I need to know if I, meet the requirements and all this sort of stuff. So, gosh. What's that all about?
Right. So the survey is very complex, actually. It's close to 100 questions, plus 7 or 8 open-ended questions that the suppliers fill out. And what we have here in the momentum wheel are the main segments of the survey. So it measures engagement and communication, looks at barriers and hindrance, friction in the relationship, but then how do the OEMs assist suppliers in quality improvement and cost reduction. It's all about mutual profit, though, on both sides. How do we look at chargebacks, and how do we look at rewarding good performance? And that all leads to trust. And in the momentum, it's not necessarily completely circular this way, sequential this way, but you can think, more communication it leads to reducing barriers, right? You raise red flags earlier. If you're doing that, you're coming out and you're really assisting the supplier for reducing costs and improving quality for the right reasons, not for compressing on margin. That leads to mutual profit. And if we're both successful, the customer and the supplier, trust builds.
So you can measure that trust, I guess, is what you're saying, by the success or the profitability. There's some relationship there. Is there?
Yeah, Mark. There is. Let me jump and show you this slide. So when we took this over, I went out and I presented the data back to the vehicle manufacturers, and almost to a T, they all said, "Well, trust is nice, Dave, but it's very nebulous, right? And what do I do with it? And how do I measure it to be able to improve? We want to improve trust, but how do I do it?" So we worked with a professor who went back to all the academic research and looked at commercial trust. And he looked at what are the measures, what are the variables that lead to trust? And it's these three things. And they're intuitive, but he proved it, and we measure it. It's about realistic expectations. It's about accountability, and it's about information sharing. And so we ask the suppliers on all those fronts, does your customer set realistic expectations? So for instance, the classic one is on annual productivity reductions, right? When the vehicle manufacturer comes in and wants a 6% or an 8% reduction, is that realistic or not? In accountability, do they follow through on commitments, right, from that side? And on information sharing. So in this new EV world that we're transitioning to, you can take a look at realistic expectations. Are those volumes that the OEs are giving to the suppliers, are they realistic? Now, they may, that's the best information we have, right? But are they realistic? On accountability, it looks at if you're doing a development program and expending the investment dollars, will you get that award in terms of the new program? And on information sharing, right, going back and forth on new technology roadmaps, looking at product cycle plans, those are all interrelated, and that's how we judge trust.
Well, I'm just wondering now, we're talking about the big picture and the big data between the OEM and the supplier community. What about on a micro scale, right inside your organization, your engineering organization? So for me as a small company, I strive to have these expectations. My engineers are always telling me, "Mark, you're crazy, we'll never meet that deadline." The accountability, okay, you got to take responsibility for this. And then sharing and that communication. It seems like all these things map right down to the macro, from macro to micro. And is that part of your story there?
It is. And here, let me just bounce back and I can run through this. This is the time series, just goes back to 2012, but we have the data going back to 2020. Of the annual results. And these are at the corporate level. And you're right, that's top down. We need to also look at it bottom up. And so a couple of the vehicle manufacturers that we work with have us cut the data by their commodity groups. So we separate out powertrain from body and white, from chassis and the like. And so they will see better how engineering is working with the supplier, as well as purchasing and manufacturing. So we do look at it that way. There are specific questions in here about engineering, like on engineering change notices, on looking at VAVE implementations and how well does that go. So the one thing we want to make a point here is that customer-supplier relationships are not just about purchasing. They are holistic about engineering, manufacturing, purchasing, but also finance and other groups too.
So it's all together. There's that interchange between your internal group and your external group.
Yeah, tied in the WRI measurements to other groups that touch their supplier council, that touch supplier relationships. So, for example, the measurement of year-over-year customer-supplier relations improvements is in product development and it's in program management, right? Because if those programs slip, it definitely impacts supplier relationships. So what they're trying to do is make it cross-functional.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is another interesting point that you have in your report is the supplier of choice or customer of choice, or there's choices to be made here. Talk us through that.
No, perfect. Look, there's a huge transition going on in the industry, right? For the propulsion over to electric vehicles. But at the same time, you have to keep the internal combustion engine side going in the industry. And so just like the vehicle manufacturers who have to have a strong ICE business to fund the EV business, it's the same thing for the suppliers. Mm-hmm. And so what the suppliers, though, are looking at are all of these demands from all of these different vehicle manufacturers, all in a pretty good time frame where they want to go 50% EV or 100% EV in a 2030, 2035, 2040 time frame. Mm-hmm. And it's too much for a supplier to take on. Mm-hmm. So they're making conscious choices of who do we want to work with. And we came up with this customer choice metric 2 years ago to try to answer that. Because the other thing we see, Mark, is there also has to be alignment from top down. So you'll see the vehicle manufacturer, the vice presidents will be on stage saying, we want to be your customer of choice. And the suppliers are in the audience saying, wait a minute, that's not what I'm hearing from my buyer, right? And that ties back to your question on trust. Right? So should I trust a company that's saying one thing, but acting in another way? So we came up to how do you judge a preferred customer? Mm-hmm. And we went through all of our data and we came up, again, it's intuitive, but we proved it with the data. We took the emotion out of it and it comes down to trust. It comes down to, can I get a return on investment of my book of business with you? And do I get rewarded for high performance? And that means a couple of things. Either one, on my formal scorecard, right, on quality, cost, delivery, and the like. Am I getting, if I'm all green, am I getting rewarded by new business? It's also on things like, if I'm opening up and shutting down my production lines for your production volatility, am I getting some accommodation on my material cost recovery? And that's what the supplier looks at. And the problem that the challenge, let me put it that way, the challenge a vehicle manufacturer has is all of those may be in different silos. So the material cost recovery may be with purchasing, but it's influenced by finance. A look on about engineering change notices, right, are driven by engineering, right, and that's, well, purchasing can't say, well, I don't deal with that, because the supplier sees the vehicle manufacturer as one customer, right, and so that's why they all have to be aligned. So we went back and we have questions, we have specific questions on each one of those variables, and we came up with our own, think of it as our own net promoter score, right? You see those net promoter scores. Would I recommend a company or a brand to a friend or a family? We did the same thing, but just on those variables. And this is what we came out with, because if you have promoters, suppliers who are ranking those 4s and 5s, those are positives. We subtract out the detractors, those that are rating the OE 1s and 2s and 3s, because even Toyota isn't perfect.
Sure.
And that's how we come up with this score. And I think this has caught the attention of the vehicle manufacturers, because this is really looking forward.
So Dave, we've got a few minutes left here, and talking about moving forward, we're all electrifying, we're all moving to electric vehicle world. What's the next step here? What do you see in your survey? How is that going to change as the vehicles all become electrified?
Right. I don't think those components that we went through on the momentum wheel change. By that I mean looking at, it's still going to be about communication. It's still going to be about assistance programs. It's still going to be about reducing friction. It's still going to be about mutual profit and about trust. But how I define each one of those is going to be different. So when we talk about responsiveness today on closing issues, it really is about hard parts still, about castings and forgings and stampings and the like. But closing an issue in the software world is a different metric.
That's right.
A different expectation. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
And so the survey is going to have to change that way to keep up with it. One other slide, Mark, that I pulled. The purchasing role, we say, is growing more complex. We asked general questions about how well do you think on a scale of 1 to 5, the purchasing organization is staffed to source the first generation of EVs. Here, GM actually came out first, which is interesting, because they jumped in, and I think once they put their target on 000, but actually put a date on there, and actually put programs behind 000, the supplier saw it. But thinking about all of the environmental objectives, on looking at being carbon neutral, what does that mean? How is it going to be measured? And things like that. The industry isn't great on those. They're all a little bit above average, if you will. But we're going to put more questions in there about that, because again, it's a cost, it's an investment, it's time on one side that the OEs are requiring of the supply base, but then how well do they offset that with reducing the cost of doing business with themselves, whether it be on engineering or chargebacks from the assembly plants. So it will evolve.
Well, we're looking forward to that. We're in an exciting industry. It really is. And whether you're in survey world, engineering world, the accounting world, we're all working together. And I'm looking forward to the next report.
Mark. Well,
so
thank you for stopping through today.
Yeah, thanks for everything. And well, thanks for joining today. Have a supercharged day, everybody. Look forward to a future episode on the road. And if you want more information about Detroit section, of SAE, all the mobility things we're doing, whether it's engineering or surveys like this, feel free to reach out to me or directly to the SAE Detroit section.